The morning I found it, I had already made his coffee. Dark roast, 2 sugars the way he liked it. The mug was still warm on the counter when I opened the wrong drawer looking for a pen, and found a manila folder with my name on it, my full legal name, my social security number, my signature, and a loan amount of $340,000 I had never agreed to. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the mug. I stood there in my kitchen in Atlanta on a Tuesday morning, reading every page, and the only sound was the refrigerator, and Marcus upstairs in the shower, singing something low under his breath, like a man who had no idea his entire life was about to be restructured. He came downstairs 10 minutes later. I handed him his coffee. He kissed me on the cheek. He left for work. I picked up my phone. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here for this. People always assumed Marcus was the successful one. It wasn't hard to see why. He was tall, well-dressed, the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately started working it, handshakes, eye contact, that particular laugh that made other people feel like they'd said something clever. He had business cards for 3 different ventures over the course of our 6-year marriage. Real estate development, a logistics consulting firm, something involving storage units that he stopped mentioning after about 4 months. None of them failed dramatically. They just quietly stopped being talked about, replaced by the next idea, the next opportunity, the next deal that was almost closed. I never said anything. That was the thing about Marcus. His confidence was structured like a house of cards, and he knew it even if he'd never admitted out loud. Every time I tried to have a real conversation about money, about direction, about what we were actually building together, he'd pivot, change the subject with a compliment or a dinner reservation, or that look he had, the one that made me feel like I was being difficult for caring about practical things. So I stopped pushing. I kept my head down, and I did what I was good at. I had been a loan officer at Meridian Community Bank for 9 years, senior loan officer for the last 3. I reviewed credit histories, analyzed debt-to-income ratios, signed off on mortgages and business loans, and refinancing packages every single day. I knew exactly what a fraudulent application looked like. I knew the tells, the inconsistencies in employment history, the slightly off formatting on tax documents, the way a forged signature never quite matches the pressure of a real one. I was good at my job. Very good. But here was the thing I had never told. Most of our friends never made a point of announcing at dinner parties or neighborhood cookouts. I wasn't just any loan officer at Meridian. I sat on the internal review committee. I had override authority on applications up to $500,000. My direct supervisor had been trying to move me into a branch management role for the better part of a year. Marcus knew I worked at a bank. He thought I processed paperwork. He had never once asked for details. In the early years, I used to find that almost charming, like he loved me, so separate from what I did, like my career was just a backdrop. And I was the whole picture. Later, I understood it differently. Marcus wasn't incurious because he was romantic. He was incurious because he was only ever thinking about himself. We met at a friend's birthday party in Buckhead when I was 27. He was funny that night, genuinely funny, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room. I remember thinking, this one pays attention. 6 years later, I understood that what I had mistaken for attention was just the opening phase of a much longer pattern. Marcus was excellent at beginnings. We bought the house in Sandy Springs 4 years into the marriage. 3 bedrooms, a backyard, a kitchen I had renovated the year before, with money I had saved on my own. The mortgage was in both our names, but the down payment had been mine. I didn't make a thing of it at the time. I just wanted us to have something real. We did not have children. We had talked about it twice, and both times the conversation drifted toward his timeline, his readiness, his vision for what that would look like. I was 34. I had stopped waiting for his timeline. The first thing I noticed before the folder, before everything, was a receipt. It had fallen out of the pocket of one of his dress shirts when I was doing laundry in late February. I almost threw it away without looking, but something made me stop. It was from a restaurant in Midtown I had never been to with him dinner for two a bottle of wine that cost more than our weekly grocery budget. The date was a Thursday. Marcus had told me he was in Savannah that Thursday for a property walkthrough. I put the receipt in the back of my underwear drawer and didn't say a word. 2 weeks later, I found the folder. I want to be specific about what was in it because the details matter. It was a loan application, a personal business loan, for $340,000, submitted to a private lending company called Bridgeway Capital Group, which I recognized immediately as one of the secondary lenders that partnered with regional banks like Meridian for overflow commercial deals. The application listed me as the primary borrower, my full legal name, my social security number, my date of birth, my employment history accurate down to my current title and salary. My credit score, 811 a number. I had spent years building with the kind of quiet discipline that doesn't make for good stories at parties. The collateral listed was our home in Sandy Springs. The signature on the bottom of page 4 had my name. It was not my signature. I stood in that kitchen for a long time, long enough for his coffee to go from warm to cool, long enough to read every page twice, then a third time, because I am thorough by training, and I wanted to be absolutely certain before I decided what to do next. I was certain. The loan had already been approved. The funds, $340,000, drawn against my name. My credit, my home had been dispersed 6 days earlier. I put the folder back exactly where I found it. I closed the drawer. I handed Marcus his coffee when he came downstairs, and I let him kiss me on the cheek, and I watched him back his car out of the driveway with the easy confidence of a man who believed he had gotten away with something clean. Then I sat down at the kitchen table, and I opened my laptop, because I didn't need to make a scene. I didn't need to confront him in the hallway or throw his things on the lawn or call his mother. I worked at a bank. I had access to things Marcus could not even imagine I had access to. And the first thing I needed to do before anything else was find out exactly how deep this went. What I found when I started pulling records that evening made the $340,000 look like the beginning of the story, not the end. I have spent my entire career learning how to read what people don't say. A loan application tells you more about a person than almost any other document they'll ever sign. Not just the numbers are almost secondary. It's the gaps, the places where the story skips. The employer listed with a phone number that rings twice and goes to voicemail. The bank statement that shows consistent deposits in round numbers, which real paychecks almost never are. The co-signer who lists a P.O. box as a home address. After 9 years, I could feel an inconsistency before I could name it the way you sense a change in weather before the sky actually shifts. I applied that same instinct to my own marriage, and once I started looking, I could not stop finding things. The Savannah receipt had been the first. I went back through my memory with the kind of focused attention I usually reserved for 6-figure applications and started cataloging. The Thursday evenings that had become Friday mornings. The new cologne I didn't recognize that appeared sometime around October and that he claimed was a sample from a department store. The way he had started angling his phone screen away from me when he scrolled a small gesture barely conscious, the kind of thing you do when it becomes habit before you realize it's a tell. I did not go through his phone. I want to be clear about that. Not because I was above it, but because I didn't need to. I had something better than his phone. I had the systems at Meridian. On the Wednesday evening after I found the folder, I stayed late at the office. This was not unusual. I often stayed late, and the 2 colleagues whose desks were nearest to mine had already gathered their things and said their goodnights. The floor was quiet. The cleaning crew wouldn't come through until 9. I had a cup of coffee from the break room, and I logged into the loan origination system with my senior credentials, and I typed in Marcus's full name. 2 records came back. The first was a small personal loan from 3 years prior, $18,000, taken out through a credit union across town, paid off in full. I hadn't known about it, but it wasn't criminal. People took out personal loans. I set it aside. The second record stopped me cold. It was a business loan application submitted 14 months ago to a lender in our network. Not Bridgeway, a different one. A smaller outfit called Crestline Funding that handled short-term commercial bridge loans. The primary borrower on the application was not me. Her name was Denise Okafor, age 31, address listed in Decatur, loan amount $97,000. The application had been denied insufficient collateral, but it had been submitted, and Marcus's name was listed as a co-applicant. I sat very still for a moment. Then I typed Denise Okafor into the system. She had a credit profile. Average score, modest income. 1 previous auto loan, in good standing, nothing remarkable. What was remarkable was the co-applicant field on that denied Crestline application. Marcus had listed his occupation as real estate developer and his annual income at $210,000. His actual income that year, the one I saw every time we filed taxes jointly, had been $67,000. He had lied on a loan application using a woman I had never heard of, and he had done it 14 months before he used my name and my 811 credit score to take $340,000 from Bridgeway Capital Group. I closed the system, logged out, wiped my search history per standard protocol, and gathered my things. Outside the Meridian building, the evening air was cool and smelled like exhaust and early spring. And I sat in my car in the parking deck on the 4th level for 11 minutes before I started the engine. I was not falling apart. I want to be precise about that. What I was doing sitting in that parking deck was something closer to calibration, the way you pause before signing your name to something that cannot be unsigned. Making sure every number is right, every condition is understood, every implication has been considered. Marcus had not made one mistake. He had built a pattern. Denise Okafor was the trial run. A smaller loan, a different lender. A woman whose credit couldn't carry the application. It had failed. So he had pivoted, found a better vehicle, one with a higher score and established bank relationship. A name that carried institutional weight she didn't know she carried. Mine. I drove home on I-285 with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. Marcus's car was in the driveway when I got there. The kitchen light was on. Through the front window, I could see the blue flicker of the television. I unlocked the door. I took off my shoes. I said, "Hey." And he said, "Hey, how was work?" And I said, "Long day." And I went upstairs to wash my face. I stood at the bathroom sink for a long time, looking at my own reflection. The small crescent scar above my left eyebrow. I got it at 9 years old, falling off a bike 7 stitches, and my mother had held my hand the whole time. I thought about her for a moment. She had raised me alone after my father left working double shifts at a medical billing office. Never once letting anyone use her name for anything she hadn't personally approved. I thought, I know exactly what I'm doing. I dried my face and went downstairs and watched television with my husband like everything was fine. It was not fine. But I needed 3 more days, because what I had found in the Meridian system was enough to understand the shape of what Marcus had done. What I didn't yet have was the one piece that would make what I was about to do airtight: the name of the loan officer at Bridgeway who had processed my application, the one who had accepted a forged signature on a $340,000 file without flagging it for secondary review. Someone on the inside had let this through. And I was going to find out exactly who. The name came to me on a Friday afternoon, and it came the way most important things do, quietly through a side door, when I was looking at something else entirely. Bridgeway Capital Group was not a Meridian partner I worked with directly. They sat 2 tiers removed from my daily operations. A secondary lender we referred overflow commercial files to when our own loan-to-value thresholds were maxed out for the quarter. I knew the name, knew the general structure, but I had no active relationship with anyone on their team, which meant I couldn't simply call over and ask to pull a file on myself without triggering a formal inquiry that would move faster than I was ready for. So I went around. Meridian had a shared compliance database with 4 regional lenders in the Atlanta metro area, a system put in place after 2019 to flag cross-lender fraud patterns before they became expensive problems. It was not commonly used. Most of my colleagues didn't think about it unless a specific case required it. I had used it 11 times in 3 years, which was 11 more times than anyone else on my floor. I logged in on Friday at 2:47 in the afternoon with my compliance credentials, and I searched for the Bridgeway file associated with my Social Security number. It came up in 40 seconds. The file was flagged internally as fully dispersed standard commercial personal loan, no irregularities noted. The originating officer's ID number was listed at the bottom of the processing record, a 6-digit code I didn't recognize, which meant it wasn't one of the senior Bridgeway staff I had encountered at the joint compliance meetings we held twice a year. I cross-referenced the ID number against the shared directory. The name that came back was Kevin Tate, Licensed Loan Officer, Bridgeway Capital Group, Atlanta office. Hire date 8 months ago. 8 months. He had been there 8 months when he processed a $340,000 application with a forged signature and a primary borrower who had never set foot in the building. I wrote his name on a Post-it note, folded it in half, and put it in the inside pocket of my work bag next to my badge. Then I closed the compliance database, cleared my session, and finished the rest of my afternoon as if I had simply been reviewing routine files, which in a way I had. That evening, I came home to find Marcus at the kitchen island with his laptop open and a legal pad covered in handwritten numbers beside it. He looked up when I came in, and bright-eyed animated the expression he got when he was in the middle of convincing himself something was going to work. "I've been running projections," he said, "for the Stonecrest property. I think we're looking at a 40% return inside 18 months, if we move fast." I set my bag on the counter. "What's Stonecrest property?" "The commercial strip I told you about, off Covington Highway." He turned the legal pad toward me. "The numbers are solid, Zoe. This is the one." I looked at the legal pad. Then I looked at him. He had the open face of a man who believed his own story completely, who had already rewritten the part where he took $340,000 from a woman who trusted him and turned it into the origin story of a success he was certain was coming. I had seen that face 100 times. I had made the mistake of believing it was optimism. "Sounds promising," I said. I made dinner. We ate at the table. He talked about the Stonecrest property for 45 minutes, and I asked enough questions to seem present without giving him anything real. He did not notice the difference. He never had. After dinner, I told him I had an early meeting and went to bed at 9:30. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about Kevin Tate, who had been a loan officer for 8 months, who had processed a fraudulent application on a $340,000 file, who had submitted his resignation the morning after the funds were dispersed. I had confirmed the resignation through the shared HR directory before I left the office. Kevin Tate was gone. But gone was not the same as invisible. Not when the file existed, not when the compliance database had a record, not when I knew exactly which questions to ask and exactly who to ask them to. Saturday morning, Marcus left early. He kissed me on the forehead and said he was meeting a contractor at the Stonecrest site. I waited until his car cleared the end of the street. Then I got up, made coffee, and called my cousin Renee. Renee was a paralegal at a firm in Midtown that handled financial litigation. We had grown up 3 houses apart in Lithonia, and she was the only person outside of work who fully understood what I did for a living because she had sat across from enough bank fraud cases to speak the language fluently. I told her everything. The folder, the forged signature, Denise Okafor, Kevin Tate, the $340,000 that had already left the building under my name. Renee was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "Zoe," she said, "you understand what this is." "Identity theft," I said. "Loan fraud, forgery." "Federal exposure," she said, "depending on how Bridgeway structured the disbursement." "I know." "And you haven't said anything to him?" "Not yet." Another pause. I could hear her thinking the same way I could hear the shape of a bad application before I finished reading it. "What do you need from me?" she said. "I need the name of the best financial fraud attorney in Atlanta," I said. "And I need to know how long I have before Bridgeway figures out the signature is forged on their own." 60 to 90 days before routine post-disbursement audit, she said without hesitating. Probably less if someone inside flags it. Someone inside already left. Then you have less. I wrote down the attorney's name she gave me. Carol Simmons. 22 years in financial litigation, former assistant U.S. attorney, an office on Peachtree Street that I had actually walked past 100 times without knowing what happened inside it. I called Carol Simmons' office on Monday morning from my car in the Meridian parking lot before I went in for the day. Her assistant put me on a brief hold. When Carol came on the line, her voice was even and unhurried in the way of someone who had heard urgent things so many times they no longer showed on her face. I told her my name. I told her what I did for a living. And then I told her what my husband had done with it. She was quiet for 4 seconds. "Can you come in Thursday at 11?" she said. "Yes," I said. "Bring the original folder. Don't move it. Don't copy it outside of secure channels. Don't discuss this with anyone at your institution until we've spoken." "Understood." "Miss Carter," she said. And I noticed she had already remembered my last name without writing it down. "You did the right thing calling when you did." I thanked her and ended the call. Through my windshield, the Meridian building stood in the early morning light. Glass and steel my name on a badge in my bag, 9 years of institutional knowledge sitting in my chest like something Marcus had never once thought to ask about. I picked up my work bag and went inside. I had 4 days until Thursday. 4 days to sit across from my husband at dinner, to answer his texts, to sleep on my side of the bed with my eyes closed and my mind running numbers. 4 days of perfect stillness before everything changed. I was very good at stillness. There is a particular skill required to be present in a room with someone you no longer trust. It is not acting exactly. Acting requires you to become something you are not. What I was doing that week was closer to editing, removing from my face and my voice and my body language every piece of information Marcus did not need to have, while keeping everything else exactly in place. The coffee, the dinner, the television, the side of the bed. I had been doing a quieter version of this for years, without knowing it had a name. Monday evening, he came home at 7, with Thai food from the place on Roswell Road we had been ordering from since before we bought the house. He set the bags on the counter and called my name up the stairs with the ease of a man who had no idea the floor beneath him had already been surveyed and mapped and found to be hollow. I came downstairs in socks and a cardigan, and we ate pad thai at the kitchen table, and he told me about the contractor meeting at the Stonecrest property. The roof needed work. The parking lot needed resurfacing. He had numbers. He was running scenarios. I listened. I asked one question about the resurfacing timeline. He took it as engagement and expanded for 12 minutes. I thought about Carol Simmons and the folder sitting in the locked drawer of my home office desk. Tuesday, that I stayed at Meridian until 6:30 reviewing a stack of refinancing applications that had been waiting on my desk since the previous week. Normal work. The kind that required enough focus to quiet the other part of my mind without requiring so much that I couldn't let that part run in the background. I approved 3 flagged 2 for additional documentation and denied 1 on the basis of a debt-to-income ratio that the applicant had tried to obscure behind a business expense reclassification that was technically legal and practically dishonest. I knew the difference. I always knew the difference. On the drive home, I stopped at a Publix on Abernathy and bought groceries. Standing in the produce section holding a bunch of kale I did not need, I thought about Denise Okafor in Decatur. I had not been able to stop thinking about her since I found her name in the Crestline file. She didn't know I existed. She didn't know that 14 months ago, her name and her credit had been submitted to a lender in a failed attempt that had simply taught Marcus what to do better the next time. I wondered if she was still in contact with him. I wondered how she had explained Marcus to herself, whether she had called him a boyfriend, a business partner, something in between. I wondered if she knew about me. I put the kale in my basket and moved on. Wednesday was the hardest day. Not because anything happened, but because nothing did. And the waiting had started to acquire a physical weight. Something that sat in the center of my chest and required active management every time Marcus spoke to me with the ordinary confidence of a man who believed himself safe. He called me at noon from the Stonecrest site to ask if I wanted to come see it that weekend. "I think you'd see what I see if you were standing in it," he said. "The bones are good, Zoe. This property has real potential." I was at my desk at Meridian with a loan application open on my screen and Kevin Tate's 6-digit originator ID written on a Post-it note inside my desk drawer. "Maybe Sunday," I said. "Yeah, if the weather's good." "It'll be good," he said with the certainty of a man who had never once thought the weather might not cooperate. After I hung up, I sat for a moment with my hand resting on the phone. One of my colleagues, a woman named Patricia, who had been at Meridian almost as long as I had stopped at my desk with a folder and noticed my expression. "You okay?" "Just tired," I said. "Long week?" She nodded with the solidarity of someone who understood long weeks and moved on. I picked up the next application in my stack and kept working. That evening, Marcus was out. He texted at 5:30, running late. "Meeting with a potential investor for Stonecrest, don't wait on dinner." I read the text, standing in the Meridian parking garage, key fob in my hand. And I thought about what I knew about Marcus's investor meetings from 6 years of proximity, that they were often real in the beginning and fictional by the third drink. I went home alone. I made a simple dinner, eggs and toast, the kind of meal that required almost no thought. I ate at the kitchen island, reading an industry newsletter on my tablet. And then I went to my home office, unlocked the drawer, and took out the folder. I had not looked at it since the morning I found it. I had not needed to. I had memorized every page on that first read with the thoroughness of someone who reviewed documents for a living. But there was something I wanted to confirm, a detail I had noted, and then set aside in the initial shock of finding it. Page 7 of the application. The section for supplemental identification. Marcus had listed my driver's license number. He had listed the correct expiration date. He had listed the correct address. But in the field for secondary ID, the field where most applicants put a passport number or a state ID, he had written a number I didn't recognize at first glance. I had thought it was a transposition error, a digit out of place. Looking at it now carefully, I understood what it actually was. It was the account number for a safe deposit box at a SunTrust branch on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. I had no safe deposit box at that branch. I had never opened one, which meant Marcus had, and he had opened it in my name. I put the folder back in the drawer and locked it. Then I sat at my desk with my hands flat on the surface, and I breathed in slowly through my nose and out through my mouth, the way my doctor had taught me years ago, for moments when the body needs instruction because the mind is moving too fast to give it naturally. A safe deposit box. I thought about what a man puts in a safe deposit box. Documents, cash, things he does not want found in the house. Things he needs to be able to access quickly if necessary. Things he is keeping separate from a life he is already planning to leave. Marcus was not just using my credit. He was building an exit. I picked up my phone and I texted Carol Simmons' office number, even though it was nearly 9 in the evening. Found an additional element. Safe deposit box opened in my name at SunTrust Peachtree Industrial. Will bring details Thursday. Her reply came 4 minutes later, which told me something about the kind of attorney she was. Noted. Brings additional exposure. See you at 11. I set my phone down and looked at the wall of my home office, the framed print my mother had given me when I got my first promotion. A single line of text on cream paper: do the work. The rest follows. Marcus came home at 11:15. I heard the front door, his keys on the hook, his footsteps in the kitchen. A pause, checking if I had left anything out, I supposed, or simply standing in the room the way people do when they believe a space belongs to them. I was already in bed with the light off. He came upstairs, and I listened to the sounds of him getting ready. And I kept my breathing even and slow, the way you do when you need someone to believe you are asleep. He got into bed, and within 10 minutes, his breathing settled into the rhythm I had known for 6 years. I lay in the dark, and I thought about Thursday. I thought about Carol Simmons' office on Peachtree Street, about the folder in my locked drawer, about a safe deposit box opened in my name at a branch I had never walked into holding things I had not put there. I thought about the $340,000 that had left a building 6 days before I found the folder money drawn against my name. My credit, the 811 score, I had built one careful year at a time. The same way my mother had built everything she had, slowly, without applause, without anyone watching. I thought about Denise Okafor. I thought about Kevin Tate, who had resigned the morning after the disbursement and was somewhere in Atlanta right now, believing he had slipped out cleanly. People who believed they had slipped out cleanly had never sat across a desk from me. I closed my eyes. Thursday was 12 hours away. I did not go to Stonecrest that Sunday. Thursday happened first. And after Thursday, nothing was the same shape it had been before. But I'm getting ahead of myself, because before Thursday there was Wednesday night. And Wednesday night was the thing that removed the last fraction of doubt I had been carrying, without admitting I was carrying it. I need to back up. Carol Simmons' office was on the 14th floor of a building on Peachtree Street that smelled like central air conditioning and expensive carpet. Her assistant, a young man named Drew, offered me water when I arrived at 10:52 and showed me to a conference room with a long table and a view of Midtown that on any other day I might have stood at for a moment and appreciated. I sat down and took the folder out of my bag and set it on the table. Carol Simmons came in at exactly 11. She was 61 years old, small-framed with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She shook my hand with the grip of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything to anyone and sat down directly across from me without preamble. "Walk me through it from the beginning," she said. "Everything. Don't edit for relevance. Let me decide what's relevant." I talked for 22 minutes. She took notes in a small leather journal with a black pen and did not interrupt once. When I finished, she sat back and looked at the folder on the table between us without touching it. "The safe deposit box complicates his position significantly," she said. "If he opened it in your name without your authorization, that's a separate act of identity fraud independent of the loan application. It suggests premeditation and a pattern rather than a single impulsive act." "That was my read," I said. She looked at me over her reading glasses for a moment. "You're very calm." "I work in fraud detection," I said. "Calm is how you catch things." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Here's where we are. The loan application is the primary instrument forgery identity theft fraud in the inducement. The safe deposit box is supplemental, but strengthens the pattern argument considerably. Kevin Tate is a loose thread that needs to be pulled. If he was compensated for processing a fraudulent application, that's conspiracy, and it broadens the exposure significantly. What do I do in the meantime? You do nothing that alerts him. You continue as normal. You do not access the safe deposit box. You do not confront him. You do not discuss this with anyone at your institution until I have spoken with their legal counsel directly. She paused. How stable is your position at Meridian? Stable. Your supervisor knows nothing. No one at Meridian knows anything. Good. Keep it that way for now. She picked up her pen. I'm going to make 2 calls this afternoon, one to Bridgeway's general counsel, one to a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Atlanta. This has federal dimensions that a civil action alone won't fully address. The word federal sat in the conference room between us like a piece of furniture neither of us needed to comment on. I drove home from Carol's office on Thursday afternoon with a folder back in my bag and a clarity that felt different from the controlled steadiness I had been operating on all week. That had been discipline. This was something else, the particular quiet of a person who has handed the weight to the right set of hands and knows it. Marcus was at the house when I got there. Laptop open, legal pad out, the Stonecrest numbers again. He looked up when I came in. How was your day? Productive, I said. He nodded and looked back at his screen. I went upstairs and changed out of my work clothes and hung my blazer carefully on the back of the closet door, and I thought 2 more days. Carol had said she needed the weekend to make her calls and structure the initial filing before anything moved. 2 more days of ordinary. I could do 2 more days. I could not have predicted Saturday. I had been out. A haircut appointment at my salon in Buckhead, a standing Saturday reservation I had kept for 3 years. I was gone for 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know the exact time because I checked my phone in the parking lot of the salon before I pulled out force of habit. And it was 1:47 in the afternoon. I came home at 2:09. Marcus's car was in the driveway. There was a second car parked behind it. A white Honda Accord I did not recognize. A small dent on the rear passenger panel, a fast food cup visible through the window on the passenger side. I sat in my car in the street for a moment. Then I got out, walked to the front door, and put my key in the lock. What I found when I opened that door, I will describe plainly without drama, because the plain version is already enough. Marcus was on the living room couch with a woman I had not seen before. They were not doing anything I could not describe in daylight, but they were close in the way of people who had stopped being careful because they believed the house was theirs for the afternoon. The woman was young, late 20s, golden caramel skin, straight dark hair, wide-set eyes that went very large when she saw me standing in my own doorway. She was wearing a yellow top I will remember for reasons I cannot fully explain, Amber. I did not know her name yet. I learned it later. In that moment, she was simply a woman sitting in my living room on a Saturday afternoon who had made the mistake of believing she was somewhere private. Marcus stood up. His mouth opened. He said my name, Zoe, in the specific register of a man who was buying himself 2 seconds to find an explanation. I looked at him. Then I looked at her. Then I looked around my living room, the couch I had picked out, the rug I had brought back from a work trip to Charlotte, the framed print above the fireplace that had been a wedding gift from my mother. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I did not say anything at all. I turned around. I walked back out the front door, and I pulled it closed behind me with both hands carefully, the way you close a door when there is a sleeping child on the other side. and you do not want to disturb what is inside. It did not make a sound. I got back in my car. I sat for a moment with my hands in my lap. Through the windshield, I could see the white Honda Accord with the dented panel and the fast food cup, and I thought about the woman in the yellow top sitting in my living room, and I thought about the $340,000, and I thought about the safe deposit box on Peachtree Industrial, and I thought about Marcus standing up off that couch with my name in his mouth like it was something he could use whenever he needed it. My phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "It's not what you think. Let me explain." I read it once. I set my phone face down on the passenger seat. I started the car, and I drove to Renee's house in Brookhaven. And I sat in her kitchen while she made tea. And I told her what I had just seen. And when I finished, she set a mug in front of me and sat down across from me and said nothing for a long moment, because she knew me well enough to know I did not need words right then. Then she said, "How close are you?" "Carol's filing Monday," I said. Renee nodded slowly. She wrapped both hands around her own mug. "Then he just made it easier," she said. She was right. What I had seen in that living room did not change the legal architecture Carol Simmons was building: the loan, fraud, the forgery, the identity theft, the safe deposit box. Those stood independent of what Marcus did on Saturday afternoons when he thought the house was his. But it changed something in me that had still, underneath all the discipline and the calibration and the careful stillness, been hoping I was wrong. I was not wrong. I drove home at 7 that evening. Marcus's car was still in the driveway. The white Honda Accord was gone. He met me in the kitchen with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not quite guilty, not quite afraid. Something in between a man who had been practicing a speech for 4 hours and was no longer confident in it. "Zoe," he said, "I need you to hear me out." I set my keys on the counter. I looked at him. "Okay," I said. He talked for 20 minutes. I will not repeat most of it here, because most of it was the architecture of a bad explanation. True details arranged to support a false conclusion, which I recognized by trade. He said Amber was a colleague. He said it was a misunderstanding. He said he had been under enormous pressure with Stonecrest, and he had made poor choices, but nothing had happened, and he needed me to trust him. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "I hear you." He exhaled. "We'll talk more this week," I said. "I've got a lot going on at work right now." He nodded. He reached out and touched my arm. I did not move away. I went upstairs, washed my face, and texted Carol Simmons 4 words confirmed. "File on Monday." Her response came in under 2 minutes. "Already planned. Get some rest." Carol Simmons filed on Monday morning at 9:14 a.m. I know the exact time because she texted me the confirmation while I was sitting at my desk at Meridian reviewing a stack of mortgage pre-approvals. And I looked at my phone once, read the message, set the phone face down, and went back to the file in front of me. The woman applying for the mortgage had a credit score of 743 and a debt-to-income ratio that was 3 points above our standard threshold. I approved it anyway on the basis of 18 months of perfect payment history and a co-signer with a spotless record. I was good at seeing the full picture. What Carol had filed was a formal complaint with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit in Atlanta, simultaneous with a civil action against Marcus personally and a notification to Bridgeway Capital Group's legal counsel that the application processed under my name and Social Security number was fraudulent, and that Meridian's senior compliance team would be making itself available for cooperation. She had also, through a contact at the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance, initiated a flag on the safe deposit box at SunTrust Peachtree Industrial, which meant it could not be accessed or emptied without triggering an immediate notification to her office. That last part mattered more than Marcus knew. I had told no one at Meridian yet. Carol had been clear about the timing. She wanted the federal filing secure and the civil action served before my institution was formally looped in, because once Meridian's legal team was involved, the information would move through channels she couldn't fully control. I had agreed. I trusted her sequencing. But on Tuesday morning, my supervisor, a measured man named Gerald, who had hired me 7 years ago and had never once given me a reason to doubt his judgment, stopped by my desk at 8:15 and asked if I had a few minutes. I said yes and followed him to his office. He closed the door. He sat down. He looked at me with the particular expression of a man who is about to say something he has been turning over for longer than the conversation suggests. "I got a call yesterday afternoon," he said, "from a compliance officer at Bridgeway." I kept my face still. "They're running a post-disbursement audit on a file from last month, a personal business loan." He paused. "Your name is on the application, Zoe." "I know," I said. Gerald was quiet for a moment. "You know." "I've known for 2 weeks. I have legal counsel. A filing was made with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit yesterday morning." He looked at me for a long moment. Gerald was 63 years old and had spent 31 years in banking, and I watched him process what I had just said with the steady, unhurried absorption of someone who had learned long ago that the surprising thing is rarely the last surprising thing. "Your husband," he said. It was not a question. "Yes." He sat back. He looked at the wall for a moment, then back at me. "You should have come to me sooner. My attorney advised against it until the federal filing was secure." "That's sound advice," he said. He picked up his pen and set it back down. "Bridgeway's counsel called me, which means they've already identified the irregularity in the origination. They're inside, man." "Kevin Tate," I said. "You know about Tate." "I found his originator ID in the compliance database 2 weeks ago. He resigned the morning after disbursement." Gerald looked at me with an expression I had seen him use exactly twice before, both times when a junior officer had done something that exceeded what he had expected of them. "Zoe." "I did what I knew how to do," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Bridgeway's counsel wants a joint meeting. Their team, our legal team, and you." He paused. "Carol Simmons is your attorney." "Yes." "I know Carol. She's excellent." He stood up. "I'll set the meeting for Thursday. You'll need to brief our general counsel. Before then, I'll make the introduction today." I stood as well. "Gerald, my position here is not in question," he said firmly in the tone he used when a matter was closed. "You are the victim of a crime committed using your credentials and your identity. Your employment record at this institution is exemplary. Any suggestion otherwise will be addressed directly by me." He looked at me steadily. "Are we clear?" "Yes," I said. "Thank you." I walked back to my desk and sat down, and for approximately 45 seconds, I allowed myself to feel the specific relief of a weight being shared, not removed, not resolved, but distributed across more capable hands than one person was meant to hold alone. Then I picked up my phone and called Carol. She already knew. Bridgeway's counsel had called her office the same morning they called Gerald. "Tate is talking," she said. I sat up straighter. "Already. FBI made contact yesterday evening. He retained an attorney by 9 this morning, which tells you he had one on standby." She paused. "He's cooperating in exchange for reduced exposure, which means we're about to learn exactly how your husband approached him and what was exchanged." Kevin Tate had been at Bridgeway for 8 months when Marcus found him. From what Carol told me that afternoon, pieced together from the preliminary cooperation agreement, the picture was this. Marcus had been introduced to Tate through a mutual contact in the Atlanta real estate network, a loose, informal web of developers, brokers, and lenders who moved in overlapping circles and occasionally moved money in ways that required a certain flexibility about documentation. Tate was new, underpaid, ambitious in the way of someone who had not yet learned to distinguish between a shortcut and a trap. Marcus had paid him $14,000 in 3 installments. Cash. The first installment when Tate agreed to process the application without secondary review. The second when the file was approved. The third, the morning after disbursement, which was also the morning Tate submitted his resignation. $14,000 to put $340,000 of my life into a man's hands without my knowledge. Carol told me the figure with the practiced evenness of a person delivering information rather than judgment. I received it the same way. But I sat with it for a long time after the call ended, not with anger, exactly, though the anger was there, steady and clean, underneath everything else. What I sat with was the specific arithmetic of it. The gap between what it cost Marcus to buy the access and what it cost me to have it taken. $14,000. My credit score. My signature. My name on a document I had never touched. On Wednesday evening, Marcus called me twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. His texts had become more frequent since Saturday, ranging in tone from apologetic to explanatory, to on Tuesday night, faintly accusatory, a single message that read, "You're shutting me out, and it's not fair when I'm trying to communicate." I read it once and set my phone down and did not respond. He did not know about Carol. He did not know about the FBI filing. He did not know that Kevin Tate was cooperating or that the Sun Trust safe deposit box had been flagged, or that on Thursday morning he was going to receive a certified letter at the Sandy Springs address, our address, the house with the kitchen I had renovated, and the mortgage I had helped carry, formally notifying him that a civil and criminal complaint had been filed against him in his full legal name. He did not know any of it. What he knew was that his wife had been quiet since Saturday, and quiet made him nervous in the way that silence always makes nervous the people who depend on noise to cover what they have done. Thursday morning I woke at 5:30. I showered, dressed, made coffee. Marcus was still asleep. I stood at the kitchen counter in the early gray light and drank my coffee slowly, and looked at the room, the island, the cabinets, the window above the sink that looked out onto the backyard where the azaleas I had planted 2 springs ago were just beginning to show the first suggestion of color. I thought about my mother standing at her own kitchen sink on the mornings she worked the early shift, quiet and deliberate, organizing herself for the day ahead without theater or complaint. I rinsed my mug and put it in the rack. I picked up my bag, checked that the folder was inside, and walked to the front door. Behind me, I could hear Marcus upstairs beginning to stir. I stepped outside. The morning air was cool and smelled like cut grass from a neighbor's yard. I got in my car. My phone showed a notification as I backed out of the driveway, a text from Carol's office sent at 5:58 a.m., certified letter delivered. Confirmed 5:47 a.m. I set the phone on the passenger seat and pulled onto the street. The letter was in the house. Marcus was waking up. Somewhere across Atlanta, Kevin Tate was sitting with his attorney preparing to say everything he knew. And in 4 days, Marcus was going to walk into a conference room at Meridian Community Bank for what he believed was a meeting about restructuring the Bridgeway loan, a meeting arranged as far as he knew by a bank representative who had contacted him directly to discuss his options. He did not know who had arranged the meeting. He did not know who would be sitting at the head of that table. He was about to find out that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who already knows everything and has said nothing. The conference room at Meridian was on the 3rd floor east side of the building with a window that faced the parking lot and let in the kind of flat morning light that made everything look exactly as serious as it was. I had chosen that room deliberately. There were 4 conference rooms at our branch. Two on the second floor, warmer, more casual, the kind of rooms where we closed good loans and shook hands and sent people home with folders full of their own futures. One on the third floor west, which had a round table and was used primarily for internal team meetings. And this one. Third floor east. Rectangular table, 8 chairs, a phone console in the center, a whiteboard on the far wall still showing the faint ghost of a budget projection from a meeting 3 weeks prior that no one had fully erased. I had booked it for 10 a.m. under Gerald's name. The invitation Marcus received through the intermediary Carol's office had arranged a process server posing as a Bridgeway administrative contact, described the meeting as a loan restructuring consultation, a chance to discuss modified repayment terms on the existing Bridgeway obligation before the account was formally escalated. It was the kind of language Marcus would recognize and respond to. The language of a door still open. The language of a problem that could still be managed if you showed up and said the right things. And said he had confirmed attendance by text at 7:43 the previous evening. I arrived at Meridian at 7:15 Monday morning. I went to my desk first and cleared my inbox and returned 2 calls that had nothing to do with any of this, because the work still existed and people still needed answers. And I had spent 9 years being the person who showed up, regardless of what was happening in the rooms other people couldn't see. Then at 8:30, I went upstairs and arranged the conference room myself. I placed a copy of the loan application. My copy, the one from the folder, flagged at 6 places with small yellow tabs at the seat where I would sit. I placed a second copy prepared by Carol's office and certified by her legal team at the seat to my right, where Carol would be. I placed a third packet thinner at the far end of the table for the FBI financial crimes investigator, who would be attending as an observer, a woman named Special Agent Dana Reeves, who had called me directly on Wednesday and spoken for 11 minutes in a voice so flat and precise it made Carol Simmons sound theatrical by comparison. Gerald would be seated to Carol's right. Bridgeway's general counsel, a man named Harrison Park, who had flown in from their Charlotte headquarters the night before and whom I'd spoken with once by phone on Friday, would sit across from Carol. I stood at the window for a moment and looked out at the parking lot. Then I went to the small credenza against the wall and poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher Drew had brought up. And I sat down in my seat and I opened the flagged copy of the loan application to page 4. And I looked at the signature that was not mine. The others arrived between 9:40 and 9:55. Carol first in a charcoal blazer with her reading glasses already on, who sat down without ceremony and opened her own folder. Gerald, who gave me a single nod when he entered the room and did not say anything else. Harrison Park, who shook my hand with the careful formality of a man who understood he represented an institution that had been used as an instrument in a crime and was managing that exposure carefully. Special Agent Reeves, who came in last, set a slim leather portfolio on the table in front of the seat nearest the door and sat down without introducing herself to anyone she hadn't already met. At 9:58, I sent a text to the number that had been set up as the contact point for the meeting, a number routed through Carol's office, confirming the room was ready. At 10:06, the elevator at the end of the hall opened. I heard his footsteps before I saw him. Marcus walked the way he always walked, unhurried, with the slight forward lean of a man who believed he was moving towards something rather than into something. He was wearing his gray suit, the one he wore when he wanted to project competence. I had been with him when he bought it 3 years ago at a Nordstrom in Buckhead, and he had turned in the mirror and asked if it made him look like someone worth trusting. I had said yes. He pushed open the conference room door and stepped inside. He saw Harrison Park first, then Gerald. His eyes moved to Carol, paused for a fraction of a second on her legal materials. Then he looked to the head of the table. He saw me. The change in his face was not dramatic. It was not the collapse I might have imagined if I had let myself imagine it. It was smaller than that, and therefore worse, a subtle restructuring, the specific rearrangement of features that happens when a person's operating assumption about a situation is suddenly and completely incorrect, and the mind is running very fast to catch up with what the eyes are seeing. He stood in the doorway. He said my name, not the way he had said it in the kitchen on Saturday in the register of a man buying himself time. This was different, quieter, the sound of a man who has just understood that the time has already been spent. "Have a seat, Marcus," Carol said without looking up from her folder. He sat down. He placed his hands on the table. He looked at me again with the expression of someone searching my face for something reassurance recognition, the version of me he had always been able to navigate. He did not find it. I looked back at him the way I looked at a loan application I had already read 3 times and already knew the answer to. Carol began. She walked through the loan application first, page by page. She identified each element, my name, my social security number, my credit history, the collateral, the forged signature on page 4, in the precise, unhurried language of someone who had done this in courtrooms and conference rooms for 22 years and understood that the most powerful thing you can do with evidence is simply present it clearly and let it be what it is. Marcus tried to speak twice in the first 10 minutes. Both times, Carol held up one hand briefly without looking at him and continued. Harrison Park spoke next. Bridgeway's position, he explained, was that the institution had been defrauded through the actions of a since-terminated employee acting in coordination with the primary perpetrator, and that Bridgeway was cooperating fully with the federal investigation and the civil action, and that the loan would be unwound with full restoration of the collateral our house to its pre-application status pending resolution of the proceedings. Marcus looked at Harrison Park. "Kevin," he said. "Kevin Tate. Mr. Tate is cooperating with federal investigators," Special Agent Reeves said from her seat near the door. It was the first time she had spoken. She did not raise her voice or change her expression. "He has provided a detailed account of his interactions with you, including the 3 payments totaling $14,000 made between October and December of last year." The room was very quiet. Marcus put both hands flat on the table. He looked at me. There was something in his eyes I had not expected. Not the calculation I was prepared for, not the performance of innocence, but something more stripped down than either of those. Something close to the face of a man who has just fully understood the distance between where he thought he was and where he actually is. "Zoe," he said, "I need you to—" "Mr. Carter." Carol's voice was even and final. "Any communication you wish to direct to my client should be made through your own legal representation, which I strongly advise you to obtain before leaving this building today." He looked at Carol. He looked at Gerald. He looked at Harrison Park. He looked at Special Agent Reeves, who was writing something in her leather portfolio with a small pen. Then he looked back at me. I reached into the folder in front of me, and I took out a document that was not part of Carol's legal packet. It was a single page, clean and simple, with a header I had typed myself on my home printer at 6 o'clock that morning. I slid it across the table. He looked down at it. "A petition for dissolution of marriage. Filed that morning with the Fulton County Superior Court. My signature at the bottom, my real signature, the one I had written myself, with the pen I used every day at the desk, where I reviewed other people's applications and decided what was sound and what was not." Marcus stared at it for a long time. When he looked up, his face had changed again, not the stripped-down expression from a moment ago, but something newer, something that, in another life, in another context, I might have called grief. He was 40 years old. He was sitting in a conference room in a gray suit he had bought because he wanted to look like someone worth trusting across from the woman who had trusted him, and the distance between those two things had just become a matter of federal record. "Zoe," he said for the last time. I gathered my folder. I capped my pen. I looked at him once directly, the way you look at a file you have reviewed and made your determination on and are ready to close. I did not say anything. I did not need to. Marcus did not leave the building quietly. I had thought he might. I had constructed in the careful architecture of my planning a version of him that understood when a position was untenable and retreated with whatever dignity remained. I had miscalculated, not by much, but enough. He retained an attorney that afternoon, a man named Douglas Webb, who had an office in Dunwoody and whose primary practice area, according to his firm's website, was listed as business litigation and asset protection, which told me something about how Marcus had framed his situation to himself, even after that conference room. Douglas Webb sent Carol a letter the following morning, requesting a pause on all proceedings pending a review of the evidence chain. Carol forwarded it to me with a single line of annotation at the top: standard delay tactic. Will respond Thursday. Nothing changes. Nothing changed. But Marcus did not wait for his attorney's strategy to develop before he started making phone calls. This was the miscalculation, not legal, not financial, but human. He called people, our people, the shared social network of 6 years of marriage, the friends who had been at our wedding, the colleagues who had been at our house warming the neighbors, who waved from driveways on Sunday mornings. He called them, and he told them his version, which I learned secondhand through Renee, who had received 3 calls in 2 days from people checking in. His version was this: there had been a misunderstanding about a business transaction. Zoe had overreacted, and the whole thing was being handled between attorneys and would be resolved quietly. He told at least 2 people that I had been under significant stress at work and that he was worried about me. I want to be precise about my reaction to this, because it matters to what came next. I was not hurt. I was not surprised. What I felt was something closer to professional recognition, the same response I had when a loan applicant tried to reclassify a defaulted account as a clerical error. I noted it, I filed it, and I let it do what it was going to do on its own. Because here is what Marcus did not understand about the people he was calling. They were not operating in a vacuum. They had their own information, their own observations, their own accumulation of small moments over 6 years that had never quite added up. The friend from our wedding who had twice lent Marcus money that was never mentioned again. The neighbor who had seen the white Honda Accord parked in our driveway on 2 separate Saturdays when my car was not there. Renee, who had known me since childhood and who had a paralegal's precise understanding of what a federal fraud filing actually meant. His calls did not have the effect he intended. On Thursday, Douglas Webb's office received Carol's response to the delay request. A 41-page brief that included a certified copy of the FBI filing the preliminary cooperation agreement from Kevin Tate's attorney, the flagged Sun Trust safe deposit box notification, the Crestline funding application listing Denise Okafor, and a forensic analysis of the signature on page 4 of the Bridgeway application conducted by a document examiner Carol had retained the previous week. The forensic report was 3 pages long. Its conclusion was stated in 1 sentence. The signature appearing on page 4 of the subject loan application is not consistent with authentic signatures provided by the named borrower, and bears hallmarks consistent with traced reproduction from a copied original. He had traced my signature. He had found something I had signed, a card, a form, something ordinary and domestic, and he had traced it. I sat with that for a long time. Douglas Webb called Carol on Friday morning. The call lasted 19 minutes. Carol called me immediately afterward. Webb is recommending Marcus accept a structured resolution, she said. He's seen the Tate cooperation agreement. He knows what's in it. What does structured resolution mean for Marcus? Criminal exposure is federal. That's not something Webb can negotiate away. That's the DOJ's decision. On the civil side, Webb wants to discuss full restitution of the loan amount, relinquishment of any claim to the marital home, and a negotiated settlement on damages. She paused. He also mentioned the safe deposit box. What about it? Marcus wants to discuss its contents as part of the settlement negotiation. I understood what that meant. The box had not yet been opened under the federal flag. Its contents were unknown to anyone but Marcus, and whatever was in it was significant enough that his attorney was already trying to put it on the table as a negotiating chip before the FBI opened it themselves. Tell Webb we'll discuss the box contents when the FBI opens it, I said. Not before. Carol's response was a short sound of satisfaction that was not quite a laugh. Already drafted, she said. Special Agent Reeves's office obtained a federal court order to access the safe deposit box on the following Monday morning. I was not present. Carol was along with a Meridian representative and a federal evidence technician. Carol called me at 11:47 that morning. "Are you sitting down?" she said. "Yes," I said. The box contained 4 items: a USB drive, a second set of identification documents in your name, not a fake ID, a legitimately obtained duplicate license and social security card, a folder with 3 additional loan applications in various stages of completion, 2 in your name, and 1 in the name of Denise Okafor. She paused. And a cashier's check made out to a LLC registered in Nevada in the amount of $280,000, purchased 11 days after the Bridgeway disbursement. I was quiet for a moment. "He was moving the money," I said. "He had moved most of it already. The check represents the remainder." Another pause. "The Nevada LLC was registered 8 months ago. The registered agent is listed as a woman named Patricia Ann Webb." I did not recognize the name. Carol told me in the even tone of someone delivering facts that Patricia Ann Webb was Douglas Webb's sister-in-law, his own attorney's family member. The call with Special Agent Reeves came that afternoon. She spoke for 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which I know because I was looking at the timer on my phone screen while she talked. The federal charges were being expanded. The USB drive contained documentation of 2 additional fraudulent loan applications. Marcus had been preparing one targeting a business partner he had convinced to give him signatory authority over a joint account, and one in the name of a woman in Marietta who, when contacted by investigators, had no idea her information had been compiled. The Nevada LLC and the cashier's check added wire fraud and money laundering to the existing charges of identity theft, loan fraud, and forgery. Douglas Webb withdrew from the case by end of business that Friday. Marcus's second attorney was a public defender. The dominoes did not fall dramatically. They fell the way most real things fall, one at a time, in sequence, each one making the next one inevitable. The Stonecrest property deal collapsed when the investors contacted by one of the federal investigators as part of the asset tracing learned that the funding source Marcus had represented as a personal line of credit was in fact a fraudulently obtained loan under his wife's name. The commercial real estate network he had spent years cultivating, the handshakes, the business cards, the deals almost closed, contracted sharply and permanently when the news moved through it, as news in small professional communities always does, quickly, thoroughly, and without mercy. 2 of the mutual friends who had received his calls the previous week called me directly. One to apologize for not seeing it sooner. One to tell me quietly that he had borrowed $8,000 from them 2 years ago. And they had stopped asking about it. Amber called Renee, not me, Renee, and asked if there was anything she should know. Renee told her in the measured tone of a paralegal who understood both the legal and human dimensions of the question that she should consult her own attorney if she had any concerns about her involvement. Amber did not call again. The house in Sandy Springs remained mine. The mortgage, which had been current entirely because of my income, continued without interruption. The collateral flag Bridgeway had placed on the property was lifted as part of the civil resolution Carol negotiated on the 15th of April, a Tuesday morning. Overcast, the azaleas in the backyard in full bloom, by then their color almost violent against the gray sky. I stood at the kitchen window and looked at them for a long moment. Before I left for work, Marcus had planted those azaleas. Spring of our second year in the house. One of his grand gesture weekends, the kind he was good at. The kind that made you believe in the version of him that could see something and want to make it grow. I had watched him plant them in the rain, with his sleeves pushed up muddy to the elbows, genuinely pleased with himself. I left them in the ground, not for him, not as a monument to anything we had been or anything I still felt. I left them because they were good azaleas, and they had not done anything wrong. And every spring, they were going to bloom exactly as they were supposed to, regardless of who had put them there or what had happened since. Some things just keep going. That's not sentiment. That's just what living things do. The federal indictment came down on a Wednesday in early May. I learned about it the way most people learn about things that have already been set in motion, not with surprise, but with the particular stillness of a conclusion arriving on schedule. Carol called me at 8:52 in the morning while I was at my desk reviewing a commercial loan package for a small business owner in Smyrna who wanted to expand her catering operation. I set the file aside and listened. Carol read the charges in order, her voice level and unhurried. Identity theft, loan fraud, forgery, wire fraud, money laundering, conspiracy to commit bank fraud in connection with Kevin Tate. 6 counts. Federal. I thanked her. I ended the call. I picked up the catering loan file and finished my review. The numbers were sound. The business had been operating for 4 years with consistent revenue. I approved it and moved to the next file. This was not numbness. I want to be clear about that distinction because I have thought about it carefully since. Numbness is absence, the place where feeling used to be hollowed out. What I had by early May was something different. It was the specific steadiness of a person who has done the necessary work and is now watching the necessary consequences arrive one by one in the correct order. There was nothing hollow about it. It was full, actually. Full of the particular satisfaction of a thing being handled correctly. The indictment was public record by noon. By 2 p.m., I had received 11 texts, 3 from friends, 2 from former colleagues of Marcus's in the real estate network, 1 from the neighbor who had noticed the white Honda Accord, 1 from my cousin Renee, which said only, "It's done." 1 from Gerald, which said, "Proud of how you handled this. Take Friday off if you need it." I did not take Friday off. 1 text I did not expect came from a number I didn't recognize, with a 404 area code. It said, "My name is Denise Okafor. I heard what happened. I've been talking to the FBI. I just wanted you to know I didn't know about you." I read it twice. Then I typed back, "I know. I'm glad you're talking to them. Take care of yourself." She sent back a single word, likewise. I saved her contact under her name and set my phone face down and looked out the window at the Meridian parking lot for a moment. Denise Okafor in Decatur, who had her own story I would never fully know, who had been a failed rehearsal for what was done to me, who had sat across from Marcus at some point and believed whatever version of himself he had offered her. We were connected by a man who had treated both of us as instruments. That was not a sisterhood I had chosen. But it was real, and I thought it deserved acknowledgement. The weeks that followed had the quality of a tide going out, gradual, consistent, revealing the shape of what had always been underneath. The civil settlement was finalized on May 19th. Marcus, through his public defender and a court-appointed mediator, agreed to full restitution of the $340,000 loan amount to be drawn from the recovered assets, including the cashier's check seized from the safe deposit box. He relinquished all claim to the marital home and its contents. He agreed to a structured payment plan for the remaining damages, the portion of the Bridgeway loan that had already moved through the Nevada LLC before the freeze, which his attorney had negotiated down from Carol's initial demand, but which Carol described to me as still significant enough to constitute a genuine consequence. My credit score, which had dropped 47 points during the period the fraudulent loan was active under my name, was restored to 814 by the Credit Bureau correction filed jointly by Carroll's office and Bridgeway's legal team. The process took 11 business days. I watched it happen in increments on my credit monitoring app, the number climbing back toward itself like something returning from a distance it had never chosen to travel. 1 point higher than it had been before. I noted this without ceremony. The divorce was finalized on June 3rd. Fulton County Superior Court, a Tuesday morning. I wore the same charcoal blazer I had worn to Carol's office the first time we met because I'm not superstitious, but I do believe in continuity. The proceeding took 40 minutes. Marcus was present with his public defender, who had negotiated the civil terms, and whose primary objective at this point was clearly to limit the criminal exposure as much as the federal charges allowed, which was not very much. I did not look at Marcus for most of the proceeding. Not as an act of performance or deliberate coldness. I had nothing left to perform, and nothing left to be cold about. I simply had no more use for his face as information. I had read it as carefully as I had ever read any document, turned every page, understood every inconsistency, and made my determination. The file was closed. When the judge announced the dissolution final, I signed my name on the court document with a steady hand, and I thought about my mother at her kitchen sink on early mornings, organizing herself for the day. And I thought she would understand this. She would not make a speech about it. She would simply nod, the way she nodded at things that were hard and necessary and correctly done. Outside the courthouse, the Atlanta morning was warm and bright, the particular quality of June light that makes the city look clean from a distance. I stood on the steps for a moment and called my mother. She picked up on the second ring. "It's done," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You okay?" "Yes," I said. And I meant it specifically, not as reassurance, not as performance, but as a precise answer to a precise question. I was okay. I was more than okay. I was standing on the steps of a courthouse in Atlanta with my name restored to itself and my home still mine, and 9 years of institutional knowledge in my chest, and a credit score of 814, and a career that had never once faltered through any of it. "Come for dinner Sunday," she said. "I'll be there," I said. The criminal proceedings moved on their own timeline, separate from mine. I was a cooperating witness, which meant I gave 2 formal statements to Special Agent Reeves and provided documentary evidence through Carroll's office and appeared once before a federal grand jury in late June, a process that lasted 3 hours, and that I will not describe in detail, except to say that when it was over, I went directly from the federal courthouse to Meridian and finished my afternoon. Kevin Tate accepted a plea agreement in July. 18 months of probation, a fine, and a permanent bar from working in any federally regulated financial institution. He was 29 years old. I thought about him occasionally in the way you think about a poor decision that was not yours, with a kind of abstract regret for the waste of it. Marcus's trial date was set for October. I did not mark it on my calendar. Carroll would tell me what I needed to know when I needed to know it. In the meantime, I had files on my desk and decisions to make, and a branch that had continued operating through all of this, the way institutions do, steadily, procedurally, without drama. Gerald stopped by my desk on a Thursday afternoon in late July with a folder in his hand, and a look that meant he had something to say that was not about the folder. "Branch manager position in Decatur," he said. "The candidate we had lined up took a role in Charlotte. The search committee meets in 2 weeks. He set the folder on my desk. It was the job description. I told them I had someone. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at him. "Decatur," I said. 20 minutes from here. Bigger portfolio. Full P&L responsibility. He looked at me steadily. "You've been ready for 3 years, Zoe. You know that." I picked up the folder. I opened it. The numbers were exactly what I would have expected. A branch the right size for the next step up market, I knew a role that required precisely the combination of technical judgment and institutional steadiness I had spent 9 years building. I thought about my credit score climbing back to 814, 1 point higher than before. "I'll have my answer Monday," I said. Gerald nodded. He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "the way you handled this, all of it, is the most professional thing I've seen in 31 years in this business." He walked back to his office. I looked at the job description for a long moment. Outside my window, the Atlanta afternoon was doing what Atlanta afternoons do in late July, thick and golden and slightly ruthless, the heat pressing against the glass, the parking lot shimmering at the edges. I thought about a kitchen on a Tuesday morning, a folder in a drawer, a cup of coffee still warm. I thought about the call I'd made. I picked up my pen, and I wrote my name at the top of the application form in the clean, unhurried hand of someone who has never needed to trace anything from anyone else. It looked exactly right. I started the Decatur branch on the first Monday of September. The drive from Sandy Springs took 19 minutes on a clear morning 26 with traffic. And I had made it both ways enough times by the end of the first week to know which route to take depending on what the sky looked like at 7 a.m. Small knowledge. The kind that accumulates without announcing itself the way all real knowledge does. The branch was larger than the one I had left. 14 staff, a portfolio with more commercial weight. A client base that included 3 small business corridors I had been studying since Gerald put the folder on my desk. On my first day, I arrived 30 minutes before anyone else and walked the floor alone the way I had learned to read a file before anyone told me what they thought it meant. I looked at the layout, the traffic patterns, the sight lines from the teller windows to the entrance. I looked at the break room and the condition of the coffee machine and the bulletin board with its layered notices, some recent and some from months ago, which told me something about the culture of the place and what it had needed and not yet had. I made a list, not of problems, of starting points. My assistant manager was a woman named Claudette, 51 years old, 23 years at Meridian, who had been running the branch on an interim basis for 4 months and who met me on that first morning with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned not to extend full trust until it has been earned in both directions. I respected that immediately. By the end of the first week, we had developed the beginning of a working language, the shorthand that builds between 2 people who both understand the actual substance of the work and do not need to perform it for each other. On Friday of that first week, Claudette stopped at my office door at 5:15, when most of the staff had already gone. "You're staying late," she said. It was not a question. "Finishing the portfolio review?" She nodded. Then she said without preamble, in the manner of someone who had decided to say a thing and was simply saying it, "I heard about what happened earlier this year, with the loan." A pause. "I want you to know it doesn't change anything for me. You handled it right." I looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," I said. "That means something." She nodded once and left. I heard her gather her things, and the particular sound of the branch going quiet around me, the ventilation system cycling the last of the daylight shifting through the blinds, and I sat at my desk in the new office in Decatur, and I felt for the first time, in a long time, the specific rightness of being exactly where you are supposed to be. Marcus's trial began on a Tuesday in October. I was a witness for the prosecution, and I testified on the second day in the afternoon session in a federal courtroom on Spring Street that was smaller than I'd expected and had the particular quality of institutional seriousness that comes from a room where consequential things are decided without theater. I was on the stand for 1 hour and 40 minutes. The prosecutor was a compact, precise woman named Assistant U.S. Attorney Linda Foss, who asked her questions in exact sequential order, building the evidentiary picture, The way a good loan file builds layer by layer, each piece supporting the next, nothing extraneous, nothing missing. I answered every question clearly and completely. I did not look at Marcus while I was testifying. Not because I was afraid of what I would feel. I had made my peace with the full inventory of what I felt about Marcus long before I walked into that courtroom. I didn't look because there was nothing in his face I needed. Everything I needed was in the documents in front of me and the 9 years of professional judgment I had brought to the stand. He looked at me, though. I was aware of it the way you are aware of weather through a window, present noted not relevant to what you are doing inside. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Carol called me at 3:47 while I was in the middle of a client meeting. I excused myself, stepped into the hallway outside my office, and answered. Guilty on all 6 counts. I stood in the hallway for a moment after the call ended. Through the glass partition, I could see my client, a restaurant owner from East Decatur who was expanding to a second location and whose loan application I had reviewed the previous week and found to be among the most carefully prepared files I had seen in years. He was checking his phone while he waited, relaxed, unhurried, a man with a good plan and the documentation to support it. I straightened my jacket. I went back in and we finished the meeting. The sentencing was scheduled for December. I did not attend. Carol attended as my legal representative and called me afterward with the terms 4 years federal minimum, security full restitution obligation on the civil settlement, 5 years supervised release. She read them in the same, even unhurried voice she had used on the very first call 9 months earlier, when I had been sitting in a Meridian parking lot in the early morning, telling her what my husband had done with my name. I thanked her. I told her she had been extraordinary throughout all of it. You made it easy, she said. You documented everything. You stayed calm. You didn't make decisions out of anger. That's rarer than you'd think. I work in fraud detection, I said. That short sound again, the one that was not quite a laugh. I know, she said. Send me your new branch address. I have a business loan coming up. I laughed. Actually laughed at my desk in Decatur in December, with the winter light coming through the blinds and the branch settling into its end-of-day quiet around me. After the call, I sat for a while and let myself simply be in the room. The office had become mine, in the way that spaces become yours slowly through the accumulation of small decisions and daily presence. There were files I had brought from the old branch. A photo of my mother on the corner of my desk. The framed print she had given me at my first promotion. Do the work. The rest follows, which I had taken down from the wall of my home office and brought here where more people could see it. I thought about the Tuesday morning in February when I had opened the wrong drawer looking for a pen. I thought about the folder with my name on it, my social security number, my signature that was not my signature. I thought about standing at that kitchen counter while the refrigerator hummed and Marcus sang in the shower and $340,000 had already left a building under my name 6 days earlier. I thought about picking up my phone. That is the part I come back to when I think about all of it. Not the conference room, not the courtroom, not the verdict. The moment in the kitchen when I could have screamed or cried or confronted him at the door when he came downstairs. All of those would have been understandable. All of them would have been the wrong move. I picked up my phone because I knew what I was looking at, and I knew what to do with what I was looking at. And I trusted myself to do it correctly, even when the person who should have been trustworthy had proven he was not. That is the thing no one can take from you. Not your credit score, not your signature, not your name on a document you never touched. The thing no one can take is what you know, and who you are underneath what you know, and the steadiness that comes from having built both of those things yourself, one careful year at a time, without applause, without anyone watching. Marcus had looked at me for 6 years and seen a vehicle. He was not wrong that I was capable. He was catastrophically wrong about what that capability would do when he turned it against me. I signed my name on the branch manager contract on a Wednesday morning in September in the Meridian HR office, with a pen I had brought from my own desk because I'd learned by then to bring my own pen to anything that mattered. My signature was clean and even, and entirely mine. I thought about my mother at her kitchen sink, about Claudette arriving at 7:30 every morning without being asked, about Carol Simmons with her reading glasses on a chain and her 41-page brief, and that short sound that was not quite a laugh about Denise Okafor in Decatur, who had sent one text and received one back, and with whom I had exchanged across the geography of a man's dishonesty the simplest and most sufficient form of acknowledgement I know. Take care of yourself. Likewise, about a credit score of 814 climbing back to itself. About azaleas in the backyard blooming on schedule regardless. I capped my pen. I went back to work. The most expensive thing I ever gave Marcus was my silence the years I spent not asking the questions I already knew the answers to. Not pushing on the things that didn't add up, not trusting what I could see with my own eyes and my own training, because it was easier to believe in the story he was telling than to deal with the story that was actually true. The day I stopped being silent was not the day I confronted him. It was the day I picked up my phone and called the right people and let what I knew do what it was built to do. If you are reading this from inside a situation where something doesn't add up, where the numbers don't reconcile, where the explanations require you to be less intelligent than you are, where the person who should be your partner is asking you to trade your clarity for their comfort, I want you to hear this clearly. You already know. You have probably known for longer than you're willing to admit. The question is not whether you know. The question is what you're going to do with what you know. Trust your read. Do the work. And pick up the phone.